Once upon a time, there was a young fox named Miles, known to many as Tails, who lived in a world full of adventure. In this world, there was a legendary blue hedgehog named Sonic, who is known for being the fastest creature alive. But one day, Sonic stumbled upon a magical fountain hidden deep within the forest. Now, you might be wondering why this ordinary blue hedgehog would want to hang out with a magical fountain, right? Well, here's the deal. Sonic had this crazy habit of testing his limits against anything that came his way, and this magical fountain was just too much of a temptation for him. So Sonic took a big leap and jumped right into the fountain, thinking he could just swim over to the other side. But guess what? This wasn't just any ordinary fountain. It was a fountain of youth, and it turned Sonic into a cute little baby hedgehog. Poor Tails, who was hanging out nearby, was the first to find Sonic in his new tiny form. And let me tell you, he was shocked to see his best buddy turned into this little ball of spines. At first, Tails had no clue what to do. He stared at Sonic, speechless. Unsure of what had happened, he looked around for answers, hoping someone else would show up to help. But there was no one in sight. It was just him and baby Sonic. That's when Tails realized he had to step up and take care of his little buddy. Slowly, Tails reached out a hand towards Sonic and gently lifted him up. As days turned into weeks, Tails found himself taking care of Sonic like a parent would. He played with him, fed him, and even changed his diapers. Talk about an adventure, right? One day, while playing at home, Tails noticed something strange. Sonic was unusually quiet, and his usually playful eyes seemed distant. Concerned about his friend, Tails went closer to check on him. And that's when he smelled it. A horrible, stinky smell filled the air. Tails followed the stench and found Sonic sitting on the floor with a big grin on his face. But Tails couldn't focus on Sonic's smile because of the terrible smell coming from him. He looked down and realized with horror that Sonic had messed in his diaper. Tails couldn't believe it. He looked at Sonic, then at the mess on the floor, and back at Sonic. He pinched his nose and said, "E.W., Sonic, how could you do this?" Sonic looked up at Tails, his eyes innocent, and giggled uncontrollably. He didn't understand why Tails was reacting like that. All he knew was that he wanted to keep playing with his toy. Tails sighed. He knew Sonic didn't mean to make a mess, but someone had to clean it up. With a mixture of sadness and amusement, he picked Sonic up and walked towards the bathroom. As he did, he couldn't help but think how strange this situation was. Who would have thought that one day he'd be the one taking care of Sonic? Sonic, on the other hand, was having the time of his life. He was too young to understand what was happening, and he thought the whole diaper-changing thing was a hilarious game. He giggled and wiggled, enjoying the attention he was getting from Tails. "All right, Sonic, time for a diaper change," Tails announced. At the mention of diapers, Sonic's face fell. He looked up at Tails with pleading eyes and squealed, "No, no, no." He tried to crawl away, but Tails was faster. "Come on, Sonic. It won't take long," Tails said, trying to soothe the squirmy hedgehog. Sonic, however, was not having it. He wiggled and squirmed in Tails' arms, desperate to escape. Tails, on the other hand, was determined to get the job done. They struggled for a bit, and Tails could feel his patience wearing thin. "Sonic, please. You're making this harder than it needs to be," he pleaded. But Sonic just kept squirming, too embarrassed to let Tails change his diaper. Finally, Tails had enough. He stopped struggling and put Sonic down. He took a deep breath and said, "Look, I know this is embarrassing, but we have to do it." Sonic looked up at Tails, his eyes full of emotion. He couldn't understand what Tails was saying, but he could sense his friend's emotions. Realizing that Sonic wouldn't cooperate, Tails had no choice but to go along with it. So he picked Sonic up again and headed to the bathroom. As he changed Sonic's diaper, he couldn't help but think how different their lives had become. Sonic, the fastest creature alive, was now a helpless baby, and he was the one taking care of him. Suddenly, Tails had an idea. He remembered how much Sonic loved to race. "All right, Sonic, if you let me change your diaper, we can have a race afterward." Sonic's eyes lit up at the mention of a race. He stopped wiggling and looked at Tails excitedly. Seeing his chance, Tails quickly changed Sonic's diaper and got him dressed. Then he said, "All right, buddy, time for that race." Sonic took off like a rocket, and Tails had to run as fast as he could to keep up. They raced through the forest, and Sonic, despite being small, was surprisingly fast. Finally, they reached the finish line, and Tails, panting heavily, asked for a break. Sonic, still full of energy, looked at Tails and said, again, he wanted to race again. Tails laughed and said, Sure, but next time you let me win, okay? Sonic nodded, and they started the race again. This time, Tails was faster, and he crossed the finish line before Sonic. Despite losing, Sonic was happy. He loved spending time with Tails, and he didn't care if he won or lost. As the sun set, Tails and Sonic returned home. Tails, despite being exhausted, couldn't help but smile. He loved spending time with Sonic, even if it meant changing his diapers. And Sonic, well, he was just happy to have a friend to play with.
Subscribe for more.